Welcome back to our series ranking the bosses of Soulsborne. As we draw near the home stretch, we come face to face with some of the more memorable foes the series has to offer. As always, thank you to our patrons who help us so. Consider joining them with the link below. With all that said, let's get into the video.
Number 75, Four Kings. For a lot of people, when they think of Dark Souls, they think of Ornstein and Smough or Artorias. My first thought is always Four Kings, and I think it's because they're visually the most representative of Dark Souls' vibe, if that makes sense. This is the original Soulsborne DPS check, and it's a DPS check because it's not actually 4 kings, it's like 8 kings. If you don't do enough damage to kill one in a certain period of time, another will spawn in, and it sort of snowballs. The most I've ever fought at once is 4 on my New Game Plus 7 file, but I probably killed like 9 in total. Anyways, this is a really good concept that plays out well and rewards saving New Londo ruins for late game, even though all directions point you towards doing it as early as possible. Ignore the fact that it's a 10-second elevator ride below Firelink, and ignore the fact that you get the ring necessary to fight these guys from Sif. You will have a much better time in New Londo if you save it for last. I think it's cool how Four Kings incorporates the Covenant of Artorias though, as without it you die from falling into the abyss, but with it you can walk on it all you want. Also, this is a cool ass spot for a Covenant to show up, if you know how to unlock them. I used to know how to get to the Dark Wraiths back when I was trying to platinum all the Souls games, but nowadays I honestly can't remember. Some people have a problem with Four Kings depth perception, but I think it's a cool feature you need to adapt to, and is a simple byproduct of the arena. The way they float around like ghosts, and the way their movesets complement the unlimited space plays into the illusion, and their attacks are probably my favorite to dodge in the game. I think the sheer volume of moves they can whip out goes under the radar too, especially because they force you to pay attention to where you are relative to them. Fair warning though, all of their attacks can track you. Also, more bosses should have a death cutscene. Four Kings is a vintage fight, and they're one of my favorites in Dark Souls as a matter of fact.
Number 74, Regal Ancestor Spirit. As many of you well know, Elden Ring draws heavily from Nordic mythology. Having read a book on the many tales within its vast mythos some years ago, I happen to have a passing familiarity with it. Among the stories that I remember best was the one where Loki convinced the Aesir to enter into a bet that an impregnable wall cannot be constructed around Asgard within a set time frame of one season. Were the conditions met, the builder, whom they later realized was a giant in disguise, would receive the sun, the moon, and get to f*** Odin's wife. Obviously, Odin was reasonably pissed off at Loki when the guy started actually pulling it off, so he goes up to him and says, "Dude, I'm gonna cut your head off if you don't find a way to make this giant take longer to build the wall." So Loki ponders the best course of action and finally decides to turn himself into a female horse and get his back blown out by the giant's workhorse for weeks on end and became pregnant. Then he gave birth to a horse. I find this interesting because he did succeed, but I feel like he probably could have just killed that guy's horse, to borrow from the Russian Knight school of conduct. That would have spared him having sex with a horse for weeks on end and giving birth at least. Kind of makes you wonder why he did that, you know? Especially considering there's no way that horse is any tougher than the Regal Ancestor Spirit, who is about as strong as any horse-esque creature could be. Not terribly dangerous, mind you, but he's got some tricks that are at the very least visually appealing. Did that myth I just told you have anything to do with the Regal Ancestor Spirit? I would wager not, but it's pretty funny, whereas talking about this boss is like talking about eating vanilla ice cream. It's good. I don't know what to tell you. It's fine, tolerable, decent, it's good. Yeah.
Number 73, Dark Lurker. As a Dark Souls 2 fan, this is a heretic take, but I think Dark Lurker is just alright. To start off, and I know this isn't really Dark Lurker's fault, but the Dark Chasm of old stinks. At least the Black Gulch one. Of course it's the Black Gulch one. What do I hate more than a run-up? A run-up where you have to fight a bunch of roided out Habals and Xanthus Crown people. It's too bad Dark Souls 2 Xanthus Crown is more like the Xanthus Tiara. What a stupid thing to change. Oh, right, my overall point being that I don't like how Dark Lurker is locked behind an area, and an annoying area at that. The fight itself is pretty good though, for the first half. Then, he just splits in two for no reason and it becomes a gank. It's pretty evident to me that this was not meant to be a gank, as for me, the difference between a 2-on-1 boss being great or decent is whether or not it has good AI. Or rather, complementary AI, and Dark Lurker does not have complementary AI, but he gets somewhat saved by his awesome visuals, moveset, theme, first phase, plus the challenge. He He might be the only Dark Souls 2 main game boss that's genuinely difficult. Even though I'm not a fan of the second phase's AI, I like that the two Dark Lurkers can both use the same attacks at the same time, or two completely different ones. It keeps you on your toes, and creates some pretty unique scenarios relative to other gank bosses. Either way, it's undeniable that the first phase is incredibly fun, and I think what they should have done was simply evolve his moveset rather than make him asexually reproduce another Dark Lurker. At least they aren't two separate health bars though. Dark Lurker's got a little bit of everything and a lot of health, and once again I think the challenge he provides is great because I beat basically all the other main game bosses first try after a 3-year layoff from fighting any of them. I don't know why they decided to make Dark Lurker a gank because he'd probably be up there with Few Knight and Suralan otherwise.
The Dark Lurker is pretty cool, but I cannot understate how much I hate the fact that some of his attacks have no knockback. Spending a human effigy to enter the dark chasm of old is already comparable to paying someone $100 for a bottle of boiling piss, but that fury is amplified 1,000-fold when you have to do it all over again because both of the Dark Lurkers decided to butter knife you at the same time and kill you instantaneously! That's the kind of shit that just makes me instantly close the game and log off for the day. Number 72, Bell Gargoyles. This is the first boss in Dark Souls that really gives you that much beloved feeling of overcoming serious odds, so for many the feeling is inexorably linked to this specific boss. It was certainly the first of that kind for me, and it accordingly has a special place in my heart on that basis alone. It was about 6 years ago, but I still remember getting my ass beat by the first gargoyle only to see another hop down halfway through and thinking, in the best possible sense, "You've gotta be kidding me." It felt doable though, and you appreciated that the game was trusting you to be up to snuff. That said, nowadays I find myself a bit closer to neutral on these guys. They have no lore in particular, so the fight lives or dies on its ability to stimulate you with the combat side of things. It's got a unique arena to be sure, but experienced players will be clobbering both gargoyles well before their heart rates can climb past a middling 110 beats per minute. This is doubly the case considering the open-ended nature of Dark Souls 1's early game, wherein you can easily strut in here with busted-ass weapons and take those boys to town. Have you ever seen what a +5 club does to a piece of magically animated stone? Cytonox pop quiz, guess. You have 1 second. Death! Death is what happens. Very swift and efficient total gargoyle death. They are not surviving if you come in here with a weapon that's better than like +3 for more than 30, 45, whatever seconds. It's a good boss, I'm not trying to rag, but it's definitely one of those things that shines brightest in the eyes of a newcomer.
Everyone likes this boss at least a little bit, right? At this point, I've beaten Dark Souls so many times with all the different runs that now I exclusively do it with an OP early Black Knight Halberd build. Fighting the Bell Gargoyles with a Black Knight Halberd feels like cheating on your wife though. This is probably the most memorable fight for me in all of Souls. It's the first true test of character and the first time I ever died in these games. Everything about it is very good, and that's all it aims to be. It doesn't try to be an epic boss, it simply does its job as the first real challenge of Dark Souls and the first 2v1, which for its time was revolutionary. Because the Bell Gargoyles serve as the first wall so well, they'll be forever remembered as one of the great bosses and moments in gaming history. Number 71, the Rotten. Of all the bosses in Soulsborne, I can confidently say that Alex and I have the biggest soft spot for the Rotten. Speaking for myself here, I fought this boss the most of any in any game ever because on my really high level Dark Souls 2 run with like 400 hours or some embarrassingly high number like that, I killed the Rotten over 30 times using bonfire aesthetics because he's the best soul farming fight in the game. But why do we actually like this boss so much? For one, the cutscene. It's pretty funny that he throws a temper tantrum after a rock falls off a rock and you just happen to be there. Besides that, he looks really good, the lighting and score combined with his appearance make the fight pretty intimidating, and his lore is great. Although, nobody knows who the Rotten really is, weirdly. Some people think he's Alva the Wayfarer, some people think he's the Sunken King, and some people think he's Pharos. I think he's Pharos because if you chop off his right arm, the arm with the guy that controls him, the Puppet Master dude's body stays there even after Rotten vanishes away, and drops a Pharos Lockstone. Take what you will from that. Once the fight begins, you're welcomed by a ton of small, burning puddles across the arena. He has an amazing arena, and the way he constantly pushes towards you really emphasizes the importance of spacing. His aggression is key to his fun, which stems from his fluidity, tied in with how he utilizes both arms in combos and overall has a good rhythm to his offense. All that together makes for one of the most fluid fights in Dark Souls 2. All the additional features like the puppeteer showing what Rotten does before he does it is cool, although I never look at that dude. It's harder to guess what he's doing than to just react normally. The Rotten is admittedly a basic fight, but I can't put it any other way than that he's just really, really fun.
Number 70, Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. We're all adults here, or at least our analytics seem to say so. I know you wouldn't dare lie to Google about your age, would you? With that in mind, I feel comfortable saying that Gwyn is a good boss, but not making eyeballs shoot out of my skull with what he brings to the table. As we all know, nobody fights Gwyn legitimately because the price of failure is a colossal 3-minute long run-up full of black knights and treacherous footing. Thus, most people's experience is that of unceremoniously parrying him to death and then watching a trophy pop. And the music. Guys, I know you won't like this one, but it's boring. From the Gwyn appreciator, this elicits a reactive response, as if you just hit them in the knee with that rubber hammer doctors use at checkups. But Alex, you're missing the point. It's all about the buildup of Gwyn as a legendary, all-powerful warrior, only to reveal him as a husk. It's a profound statement on the blah blah more nerd babble. I get it. The
atmosphere
is awesome. Almost as good as Demon Souls, the crown king of
good atmosphere.
The only thing that matters in video games. That's cool, man, but it's kinda lame. Maybe I'd care less if it was immediately preceded by a boss that filled the role of cool finale, but it isn't, so my lust for battle goes unsated. FromSoft has a serious boner for making downer final bosses, which they didn't shake off until Dark Souls 3 for some reason. That said, Gwyn is a solid boss if you actually fight him legitimately. He's a hyper-aggressive crackhead, in fact, and no pushover. We have him this high for a reason, after all. But as I just said, the game gives too much of a disincentive to make that feasible. This is not the Gwyn fight experience you are going to get unless you're the kind of person who doesn't mind walking through the kiln of the first flame multiple times. If I had a bonfire right outside, I'd love to learn the intricacies of his moveset and enjoy the duel. But once again, that is just not the case. So a dog's death it is for this most unfortunate Lord of Cinder.
For my whole life, I've been parrying Gwyn, and now the one time I do it for YouTube, I couldn't parry him if I tried for an hour, which I basically did. Alex and I both realized how bad we were at parrying the last time we were hanging out while watching over our footage trying to think of a movie to see. Neither of us could parry this dude for our lives, which is crazy because he's one of the easiest fights to parry in the series alongside Pontiff Soulsborne. By the way, we ended up watching Mad Max Fury Road, and it was epic. Anyways, during our playthroughs where we tried parrying and not parrying Gwyn, we both realized how poorly made Gwyn is in terms of his aggression. If you don't parry spam, this fight kinda sucks. He's got way too much aggro and essentially gives zero reprieve. It's pretty obvious too that he was designed to get parried, and since Dark Souls was made in the days before multi-phase boss fights, Gwyn simply remains a cool but lacking final boss that's honestly underwhelming due to his design being made to be cheesable. Number 69, Yorm the Giant. For some reason, this is one of the most divisive bosses in Soulsborne, but I don't really get why. In my opinion, he's pretty good, and that's how he's always been. Cool, easy, a decent spectacle. Some people love this for whatever reason, and some hate it for whatever reason. He was perhaps over-marketed for what the boss actually is, but never falling for gaming PR is like rule 101 of being a fan in this industry. My only real complaint about Yorm is that the Storm Ruler should either be at the top or bottom of your inventory, and it should be at least a little obvious in the selection menu. Anywho, I like how easy this fight is, and I like the Storm Ruler a lot, not because it's a callback or whatever, it's just inherently cool. Yorm is the boss fight equivalent to Slime if you remember that. He's satisfying to dodge, satisfying to hit, and satisfying to look at, but if you stay too long, he does get old. Now that I think about it, Yorm has the same Phase 2 problem as Aldrich, in that he turns a little bit orange, and that's the only difference between the beginning and end. Maybe I'm setting my bar too high, but I mean, in my defense, most FromSoft bosses since Bloodborne have had solid phase evolution, so it's a little disappointing that one of the most important and pivotal fights in the game barely has any at all. So, there's another complaint I have. Also, in my fight he went into Phase 2 after one hit. Way to skip the foreplay. Still, Yorm is really fun to speedrun, and it's a blast winding up the Storm Ruler and nailing him on the head for 5,000 damage.
I did a run of Dark Souls 3 using only fist weapons one time, and Yorm took me like 20 minutes. I like him, but it's kind of embarrassing for him that I was able to do that. Number 68, Iudex Gundyr. Dark Souls 3 has a design philosophy that I very much respect. There are a lot of flaws to be sure, with drab, hideous areas making up about 80% of its non-boss fight content, but when you're actually in a fight, they 100% go all out towards making it as cool as possible. Great music, fast-paced, cool designs, they're almost all on the right track. If there is one part of a game I care about, it's the bosses. Look at our channel. You see many area rankings these days? I care about them, sure, but most of the time I ignore everything other than upgrade materials and sprint between bosses like a madman. Iudex Gundyr is very much so a representative of this approach, flipping the bird to his position as first boss and showcasing a nimble and deadly moveset sure to fire up anybody new to the series. When I first played Souls 1, I rage quitted the Duke's Archives and booted up Souls 3 instead, and Gundyr won me over to the extent that I went on to finish the entirety of 3 before even returning to 1. It's just more action-packed and fun to play, simple as. Gundyr himself has a really neat design owing primarily to his armor, and a halberd was a weapon that we hadn't really seen at that time, so his moveset was pretty novel. He even has a second phase, although I think it's a downgrade from the first because he turns into an enormous blob of undiscernible muck, which is kinda lame. Speaking of lame, the massive upload gap happened in part because I ran out of ideas for how to end this specific segment. Crazy, right? I spent hours and hours staring at this exact part of our Google Doc with a mind blanker than a monk could hope for after years of meditation. Scripting for bosses I don't hate is impossible, I tell you. It's like pulling teeth or raking my nuts over hot coals. I should get an Adderall script and start taking amphetamines.
Number 67, Penetrator. Penetrator is a cool name, but I wonder if this is called Penetrator because of bad translation. Either way, he definitely lives up to his name. I got penetrated a lot in this fight, even though I didn't want to. I'm terrible at Penetrator, and I wish I was good because he's probably my favorite boss to roll through of all the 18 fights in Demon's Souls. Either way, Penetrator is really easy. Perhaps too easy. And that's why I'm not very good at fighting him. Like Old King Allant, because he does damage scaled for World 1 and not the endgame, I don't really have a survivalist need to learn how to fight him. I can take however many hits I want and be completely fine. He moves very slow, and besides the one spin attack, he telegraphs his moves about a second in advance, which is a shame because he has one of the best boss weapons in Demon's Souls. I think if Penetrator moved faster, had a bit more health, and I guess if he was just generally difficult, he would be a very good boss. However, due to his simplicity and easiness, which feel lame as he's typically the game's penultimate fight, Penetrator is a flop. Or maybe it'd be more apt to say he's a missed opportunity, as despite his lack of challenge, he's still fun enough to be a top 2 boss in Demon's Souls in our opinion.
Number 66, Sin, the Slumbering Dragon. I used to have this guy hanging out in the VIP lounge with the best of them, but my latest replay really put everything into perspective. He flies too damn much. That's a fatal flaw, as simple as it is to convey. At this point, you might as well just give Mikolash wings and make him shred weapon durability. The durability thing isn't awful, at least if you remember to keep a repair powder in your hotbar, but I really don't see why it exists either. It's there solely to be a cheap gotcha for first-time players who forgot weapon durability exists, which, to be honest, I still do myself. It's a mild but noteworthy nuisance. I will say though that if you get good luck with his behavior patterns and he decides to sit tight like a Boy Scout, it's a significantly more entertaining and serviceable boss than he is otherwise. Dodging those exploding poison orbs feels like it's something straight out of Dragon Ball. I'm hyped as hell whenever I pull it off and get to see my guy stroll out of the smoke unscathed. It's a bit of a coin flip on whether or not I'll enjoy fighting Sin, but it tends to be enjoyable more often than not, if I had to say. I think I might just be biased because I have a weird thing about disliking dragons. I feel like it's the most boring idea ever. Either make a boss character with cool lore, or a monster with a cool design. A dragon is always going to be fighting an uphill battle to differentiate it from the 9 gajillion brethren it has, which you'll see tends to be the biggest factor in whether one is good or not, although FromSoft has definitely improved as of these last few years.
Even though Sin is, in my opinion, a little bit repetitive compared to other elite dragon bosses in Soulsborne, man is he awesome. He's one of my favorite Dark Souls 2 bosses to fight, and I think it's because he feels earned, seeing as he's the final room of the long and treacherous Sunken King DLC. If Sin was made in Souls 3, I have no doubt he'd be on par with Nadir. Number 65, Old Iron King. This is one of FromSoft's most original ideas. Albeit, it's not a great idea, but it's pretty original, whether or not you like it. Old Iron King is, I'll say, a semi-stationary boss, but with a tiny arena and a little hole in the middle that I've actually never fallen into, but apparently everyone else has. I say it a lot, so it's probably redundant at this point, but the main thing I appreciate about Old Iron King is how many attacks he has. There's a general strat which entails you standing near the exit fog wall while he attacks, and then moving in during his recharging period between attacks because he can't reach there unless he uses his laser. but that's kinda my point. You can't even fully cheese him because his moveset is so well made. My main complaint about Old Iron King is that I wish he moved around more, although he may only be able to do that on New Game Plus. I like how much time he gives you to retaliate after he attacks you though, but I think sometimes his hitboxes are a little wonky. Old Iron King is my go-to example of a Dark Souls 2 boss. He's original, not very hard, looks cool, and has good music. Plus, he's the titular character of the Iron King DLC, one of the best add-ons in the entire series.
Number 64, Godfrey, First Elden Lord. We are, of course, with this entry referring to the boss I call Ghost Godfrey, except Godfrey isn't dead, which shoots that explanation out of the air. Astral projection, concert hologram, these famous wrestlers pull the craziest shit. I trust we all had the same reaction to walking into a seemingly mundane room and finding the Elden Lord himself teleworking, which in my case was speechless shock and panic. One thing that will become quickly apparent to you while fighting Ghost Godfrey, though, is that he's a bit of a phony. He gets you all riled up for a huge battle and then lets you down easy when you realize he croaks before you can even reach a full minute of sustained fighting. It's fun while it lasts though, and definitely works in service of the real Godfrey boss by giving you a taste of what's to come.
Number 63, Divine Dragon. Whoa, this fight looks crazy. To be honest with you though, it's not that crazy. Actually, for the first 2 minutes, it's boring. You fight a bunch of trees with wooden dragon heads that fart poison. Once you manage to beat them, the real Divine Dragon spawns in, and I gotta say that cutscene is maybe the best one in Sekiro. Anyways, once the fight starts, you make your way towards the dragon, use lightning reversal, maybe get knocked back, or maybe keep swinging between the trees, and do it a bunch of times over. You can actually beat Divine Dragon in under 2 minutes if you get a really clean fight, but I forgot what to do in the second phase and ended up running around for like 2.5 minutes, awkwardly standing near his crotch while he did his big combo over and over. And then I remembered phase 2 is the exact same as phase 1 and finished the fight right after. I'll admit the final hit is pretty cool and so is lightning reversal, but doing it over and over again feels a little monotonous. Overall, Divine Dragon is hard carried by visuals, grandiosity, and atmosphere rather than his actual, frankly repetitive gameplay, a stark contrast from every other boss in Sekiro.
Number 62, Gyobu Oniwa. This fellow is mostly famous for the power and authority with which he screams his own name, which I can respect as someone who has to master the art of speech for my work. I think there very well might be something to the strategy of yelling to announce your presence whenever you enter a room. I'll give it a shot and try not to blow all your eardrums out. My name is Alex Spencer, and I wish I was playing the newly released at the time of scripting Elden Ring DLC instead of finishing this video. That's how you know this is an old one. Anyways, as far as gameplay goes, Gyobu is the coolest first boss in the series, no contest. Gundyr is cool to be sure, as I said, but you're not grappling around a battlefield and listening to war cries. Props to this guy for his mean set of pipes and equestrian talents.
Number 61, Murgo's Wet Nurse. I think maybe my most embarrassing moment in my whole YouTube career was my Murgo's Wet Nurse segment from our 2021 Bloodborne ranking where I shamelessly copied a Democracy joke about this fight's name. And I mean, it wasn't even a good joke. I managed to totally botch a verbatim copy of on-the-nose observational humor about the fact that the name Wet Nurse sounds a little gross, pretending I didn't even know what it meant. I was 16, hadn't read a book since first grade when we made that video, and I was still knowledgeable enough to know that a wet nurse is a caretaker for a newborn. I hate that video. Anyways, Murgo's Wet Nurse. Great boss. Alex and I both feel that Bloodborne's main game bosses are a lot weaker than people are willing to admit, and while Murgo's Wet Nurse can be a mediocre experience if she gets stuck in a loop of doing the stationary swipe attack, due to her extremely high counter damage plus the spin move and the overall vibe, she's one of the main game's top bosses in our opinion. The cloning move is debatably the most unique attack in all of Bloodborne, and I actually enjoy running in circles as opposed to paying attention and dodging like I believe Alex did. Nonetheless, to me, Murgo's Wet Nurse is like a BioShock gift basket. You get rewarded for good karma. In this case, you get Murgo's Wet Nurse as a reward for dicking around with Mikolash. She's fun, she's easy, she's really satisfying to hit, especially with beast blood pellets, and due to her health, she's always a little bit of an endurance test. This fight is overall a positive experience.
Number 60, Godric the Grafted. It's hard to take Godric seriously once you know that in the lore of the game he's pretty much Greg from Succession. He got a 23andMe report that he was Godric the Golden's 17th cousin twice removed and went to town with his Golden Order LARP, going to patently gruesome lengths to increase his power from level 1 Goon to level 100 Dragon Mutant Limb Guy. Even then, Melania slutted him out and spanked him senseless at some point during the fracture, so he's in lethal aura deficit when you find him talking to himself in the courtyard in Stormvale. He's not too challenging, especially once you get to his second phase where he develops a bad habit of shooting fire the wrong direction, but as the first shard bearer you likely face, I remember being hyped as hell when I first made it here. Sheer spectacle alone carries him above a lot of bosses from the older games, and I enjoy the battle well enough to feel comfortable giving him the edge over some mid-tier Souls 3 and Sekiro bosses.
Maybe I'm alone in thinking this, but Godric is pretty average compared to the rest of the major Elden Ring bosses. I know there are about like 30 or so that we've counted, but I'm talking about the real major bosses like Morgott and Mog and all of them. I think he's way too easy and not as interesting as his competition, and his lack of difficulty compared to Margit makes him feel a little disappointing. His lore is really cool though, not lack of interest in that way. Anyways, in my opinion, Godric is a fantastic boss, but if he was a bit harder, I'd consider him more among the true elite of Elden Ring. Number 59, Looking Glass Knight. This may be controversial, but I think this is a better looking spectacle than Burnt Ivory King. I'm not saying it's a better spectacle, but it looks better in my opinion. Anyways, Looking Glass Knight is by far one of the highlights of Souls 2's main game, and yes, that's largely due to the setting and build-up. Drangliet Castle is your ultimate goal in the game up to that point, and once you reach it, it's pretty confusing. Acid rooms, painting rooms, some random woman sitting in a chair above the acid room, the executioner's chariot just being there, the dragon rider just being there, and the belfry gargoyles, and the ruined sentinels, and of course the rain and lightning that create a perhaps overdramatic backdrop. Nonetheless, Drangliet Castle is a long and winding area that culminates in this fight, and boy does it land. The main complaint I have is Looking Glass Knight's over-reliance on thunder attacks, which are fairly awkward to avoid due to him rotating on an axle, their deceptively wide range, and follow-ups. It's cool a couple times, but not when it's like half the fight. And the one time he wasn't using it, by the way, he was walking in place. All of that wasn't a bash against his arsenal though. His sword is awesome, and so is his armor and shield, the latter of which is a pretty famous addition. Not only is it impenetrable, but he can also summon a fairly strong NPC. I'm just being nice calling him fairly strong though. I tanked through him without dodging and killed him in about 15 seconds. Either way, the Protector of King Vendrick's Passage is one of Dark Souls 2's strongest bosses, an extremely memorable fight with little flaws and unparalleled visuals.
Number 58, Isshin Ashina. No, not the crackhead with the revolver, the other guy. I'd like to start this segment with a middle finger to FromSoft for making it so you can't fight every boss in Sekiro in one playthrough, which caused us a lot of trouble making this video by demanding we play through Sekiro twice each. That aside, there really is no reason someone should pick fighting this guy over Isshin and Owl Father if they knew ahead of time what the decision with Owl means with regards to the story progression. It's a cool fight for sure, but the opportunity cost is simply too great. The first phase with Emma is a similar deal to Genichiro's appearance before Isshin, where some people count it as its own boss, but it's only a single health bar, so we feel it gets absorbed by the fight that follows in both cases. The main thing of note about her is that trying to heal in this phase is outright impossible a lot of the time, because she'll instantly lunge across the room to pimp slap the gourd out of your hands before you even take a sip. She did make the thing, so I guess she'd know better than anyone else how important that tactic is. As for the old man himself, he functions as a toned-down version of his most notorious form, with a bit of fire to make up for it. He has a tendency to go for the famously punishable double Ichimonji, but otherwise it's still a legit fight. It's fun, but not really that climactic or cinematic feeling, so what's left hanging on that department, earning it an upper mid-tier placement on gameplay basis alone.
Number 57, Watchdog of the Old Lords. Watchdog of the Old Lords is my 25th favorite fight of the 193 bosses we counted across Soulsborne. While that may sound crazy to some of you, I don't get how more people don't consider this one of the better bosses in Souls, nonetheless in Bloodborne. I understand it from the perspective of the defiled chalices are a dumb idea and this stinks because of that, but I kind of view it the opposite way. Although, it's only fair to say before I defend this boss that if you don't like the one-shot jump attack, I totally get that. It has bad hitboxes. But back to my point about the defiled chalice, this fight is a challenge of perfectionism you'll find basically nowhere else in the series besides Melania. Beating this boss is entirely dependent upon your skill, but due to it being in the defiled chalice, people understandably succumb to frustration. However, they fail to realize that simply mastering this fight makes you invincible, whereas with Defiled Amygdala or the Defiled Keeper, regardless of how good you are, you could still die at any moment due to their poorly designed movesets. To me, Watchdog feels extremely fair outside of the jump attack though, and is the sole reason why I'm good at this game. I remember in 8th grade and freshman year I used to go to Alex's house every day and play all the Souls games there because I didn't have them at home, and I died to this boss over 50 times in my original Bloodborne file. Since those couple of days, I'd like to say I've basically become a god at Bloodborne, but that's pretty untrue because I died 5 or 6 times to Watchdog this playthrough alone. But besides the point, in this fight as a whole, I'd advise extreme caution. Never stay too close because of his jump attack, and especially in the later phases where he can pull out the nuclear AoE at any given moment, or the chop attack, which, if you get caught in the first 2 bite animations, will guaranteed kill you. Like anything, it's understandably a big pain in the ass having to be patient, but if you just take your time and slowly chip away at the thing, you'll win before you realize it's over. Which is way more accurate than you probably think it is, by the way. This fight's music gets tense as hell by the 3 to 4 minute mark, and you will not be paying attention to his health bar. And this is my favorite theme in Bloodborne. On another positive note, I really like the armor thing it has going on. For one, it's satisfying to break and see all the orange blood spill everywhere when you attack the weak spot after, but it also allows for a variety of different strategies you can employ. I generally dumb this fight down to 2 main ways of going about it: the amateur way and the master way. The easier but less damaging method is to treat him like Dark Beast Parl. Break each of his limbs and make use of the weak spot period before he heals, and then move on to the next one. When you're at his legs, he's a lot more ineffective with attacks, but beware of the AoEs after you break a limb, as well as his stomp attack, which he pulls out kinda randomly with minimal telegraphs, at least from his backside. While that strategy works pretty well, the harder but more efficient method is to use a longer weapon and hit his head. This removes basically any safety at all, but his head is the biggest area to hit on his body and takes the most damage, especially when it loses its armor, so it's a good trade-off. In this case, I used the transformed Saw Cleaver R1s and it worked really well, but I should try it with a straight-up long-range weapon like Ludwig's Holy Blade or the Kirkhammer sometime. Either way, Watchdog of the Old Lords is, in my opinion, one of the best bosses in Souls, and by far the best Chalice boss Bloodborne has to offer.
Number 56, Lawrence, the First Vicar. I absolutely despised this boss for a long time, primarily due to the psychotically long run-up. But one thing I'd say people have wrong about this fight is that it isn't just a flaming cleric beast reskin with godly stats and AoEs. I mean, he is that, but there's a lot more going on. For starters, his music absolutely bangs. That matters a good deal to me, so that's already a good start. He's also extremely satisfying to have a good fight against, probably precisely because of how punishing it is. The attacks he puts out do horribly high damage, sure, but claims of getting one-shot are very overblown. I found that a lot of the time people saying something one-shots them, quote-unquote, means they just took about 70% of their health as damage and died mid-heal. Which is always supremely frustrating, I get it, but I don't think we can quite chalk that up as an instantaneous death. It gives this feeling of being on a razor's edge, which shoots your adrenaline up something special whenever you remember that death means jogging through 2 minutes worth of roving cannibal gangs and literal bloodhounds. It's a lot like College Park if you step more than a block off campus. A bit off topic, but there are some really sharp parallels between beasts and homeless folks. They were once human, and it's a damn shame things happened the way they did, but if you show them any mercy or treat them like one of you, they're gonna take a bite out of you. One time I was feeling particularly charitable, so I gave this guy a $20 bill through my car window when I was parked in a grocery store lot, and the guy reached into my window and tried to snatch my whole damn wallet. Like, dude, is $20 not a fucking windfall? I tried closing my window, but he didn't take his hand out, so it was super awkward because it got crushed by the window, so I had to keep lowering it a bit and then incrementally forcing his hand out. I managed to tear my 20 out of his filthy, disgusting hands without tearing it, which was a great relief to me. The whole time, he's freaking out and going like, oh hell, and screaming in pain, and it's honestly darkly satisfying to be in a situation where it's totally socially acceptable to torture someone who tried to rob me, but my kind, forgiving nature won out, and I just let him do his thing once I dealt with it. Living in Yarnum is probably 100 times this bad, thanks to Lawrence getting everybody tweaked out on the old blood like a Victorian Ronald Reagan, so the big guy really had a beat down coming anyways, karmically speaking. His second phase is a nice breath of fresh air, since he's virtually a non-threat, and it's funny watching him scoot around like a COD Zombies crawler while you pummel his head in with bone saws or giant hammers or what have you. I get hating this guy, but I just had a damn good time this last run and had to give him his dues.
I think I speak for the masses when I say Lawrence is a big, fat piece of orange trash. He's just got a lot of health and is a pretty annoying fight. Or rather, a pretty aggravating fight. Dying to this dude's second phase feels like getting punched in the dick. I appreciate how difficult he is, but I think if he had a little bit less health, he'd be a lot more fun. He's just overwhelming. Number 55, Abyss Watchers. We recently got a comment saying this was someone's least favorite boss in Soulsborne because it takes them 15 minutes to kill Abyss Watchers and that the Watcher who's on your team takes too long to kill the boss. I could make fun of him, but who am I to judge? We each have our own opinions, so I'm actually going to take a second here and say to everyone who gets enraged by these sorts of videos, and believe me, we get a lot of hate, let it go. We get so many comments saying that our opinions aren't the same as everyone else's, and because of that our channel sucks and we should become better people or whatever. But for one, I mean, you could listen to us explain why we think what we think, but on a serious note, that's life. We have unique opinions because we have critical thinking. That's how a personalized list or ranking works. And when it comes to opinions, be more like this guy. Just because some YouTuber said Bed of Chaos sucks doesn't mean you have to think it sucks. You may love it, and if you do, just say it. Nobody will care unless they're idiots, or if you shove it in their face. And back to our cool commenter, I've never seen anyone say this boss is even bad, nonetheless the worst fight in the series, but he's entitled to his opinion, and frankly, I like that he has his reasons, even though he probably should join in to help the NPC kill the boss, instead of watching them fist and stab each other from far away like some weird effed up porno. Anyways, Abyss Watchers. If they had a bit more health, they'd be one of the best bosses FromSoft's ever made. But it turns out they have less health than the mini-bosses and giant tree things in Pharaon Keep, so you end up blue-balled from the epic cutscene and epic fight that lasts about 30 seconds per phase if you get some cheeky backstabs in. But I guess that's a point to how good Abyss Watchers are. Even though you'll probably be in there for less than a 20th of the amount of time it took you to fully explore Pharaon Keep, you still always leave thinking, damn, that was awesome. Phase 1 thrives in its gradual rise in complexity, and when the ally Abyss Watcher joins, it's seriously one of the coolest moments in Dark Souls 3. And in this fight, the dude had a frickin' mission. He ended Phase 1 in less than 10 seconds of consciousness and did it only getting hit once by the other Abyss Watcher who blindsided him while he was star platinuming the main one. The mid-fight cutscene plus Phase 2 is one of my favorite transitions in this series, adding new attacks and streaks of fire to the end of every move, forcing you to rethink your defensive approach. It's still not as challenging as I'd like, but damn is he fun to roll through. It's like a little bit more difficult version of Penetrator, and also better. It's pretty interesting that if you have a decent attempt, you'll probably fight Abyss Watchers for a maximum of 2 minutes, the majority coming from the end of Phase 1 where the 2 extras pop in to cause a bit of chaos and confusion. Yet still, for almost everyone, Abyss Watchers are agreed upon as a great boss. It's amazing that they don't even come close to cracking into the top half of Dark Souls 3's bosses for us, as we both consider this one of the stronger fights in gaming in general.
Number 54, Bloodletting Beast. There's this one guy who made a series of Bloodborne theory videos saying that Bloodborne, rather than having an actual mythos of import, was solely meant to be a metaphor for how crude and barbaric old medical practices were. I watched about 4 of these videos, each in the ballpark of 40 minutes long, and I have to disagree rather strongly. I think the parallels signify inspiration, but not allegory. What would even be the point of that? Was Miyazaki just kicking back, reading archival medical records about electroshock therapy and thinking, my goodness, they did not, and clutching his purse? I think he just thought this stuff looked cool and then built a world around it. To what end would he be pursuing that as a social commentary? Who is he convincing that bloodletting is actually scary? For that matter, bloodletting is pretty damn scary, I just didn't need this guy to spell it out for me. He's one of the precious few Chalice bosses that's worth their weight in blood, a stark contrast to the legions of stupid riffraff padding out many of their chambers. The only way they can make this guy any scarier, God forbid, is if they made him headless.
Number 53, Headless Bloodletting Beast. Bloodletting Beast, but more awesomer. This fight is epic. 1, he has a parasite worm pop out of his head in Phase 2 that gives out poison. 2, he has the infamous Earthquake attack, which I've never really cared about. And 3, he has the same theme as Watchdog of the Old Lords. Hell yeah. Alex summed up Bloodletting Beast, and this is in essence the same fight, but with enough minor differences to qualify as unique according to the community, so according to us too.
Number 52, Storm King. Demon's Souls is many things. One of those things is a game that is kind of bad. But even a broken clock is right twice a day, which it certainly was with the Storm King. For starters, they kill it right off the bat with the
Atmosphere.
I love the sound of storms. I even have a little machine that makes the noises of one for when I sleep at night. This may not be a comforting storm, in fact it is a demonic, evil one, but I appreciate the aesthetic nonetheless. In general, the Shrine of Storms had a cool thing going on with the lore of the Shadow Man, culminating in this fight in their own mysterious little Stonehenge of sorts. It reminds me of Aboriginal myths, at least as they exist in my foggy childhood memory of them. When I was little, we lived near this hippie co-op place, and my dad used to buy these CDs they'd sell in the checkout called World Music. One of them was from Australia and had a bunch of Kiwi folk songs on it. I swear at least half of them were about shapeshifters who eat children or some other such spooky stuff. I'm kinda just talking out my ass, but I feel like this is the sort of creature that would exist in their myths, especially considering Australia is full of crazy creatures anyways. The real fun of the fight, though, of course, comes from literally splitting the sky in half with a giant sword and downing this colossus of a beast. It's a treat for the eyes and whatever part of your mind it is that gets stimulated when you kill big things. The caveman cortex, so to speak. Big fan of this guy, awesome boss who is tragically stranded amidst legions of inferiors.
Number 51, True Monk. I don't like Corrupted Monk, but I love True Monk. Well, I'll be conservative and say I really like True Monk. This is one of the best arenas in the series in my opinion, due to both its visuals and impact on the mechanics of the fight, specifically the Phase 2 skip. I've actually never fought True Monk's second phase, whether or not that's a bad thing. Either way, this is in my view a more rewarding yet challenging upgrade on Corrupted Monk. If you're good enough, you can beat her quickly, whereas once again with Corrupted Monk, you gotta wait out a timer before you're even able to start affecting her posture meter. I think how often you can Mariki counter and jump counter this boss is a big reason why I like it so much. Everyone talks about the deflections and those are great, but Mariki countering its huge ass spear is peak satisfaction. I'll try and fight the second phase someday, but from the videos I've seen, the ghost part is cool, and then it's just phase 1 again. To me, this fight is ideal as a 2-phase boss instead of 3, but is even better with a skipped phase, just like how it is. Speaking of, phase 3 manages to greatly improve the already fantastic first. That added fear of the one-shot centipede ticks this fight up a notch, and I really appreciate how the boss trades offense for defense, leaving herself way more open, but also having the ability to kill you in one hit with terror. True Monk is a type of boss I wish happened more often. It's cool seeing a purposefully unpolished version and then a polished version of the same boss in the same game. Good job, FromSoft.
Thanks so much for watching and we hope you enjoyed. As always, stay tuned for the next installment and make sure to catch it early on Patreon if you're so inclined. That's all for now, deuces.